Tervetuloa seuraamaan RTV:n Maailmankuvia-sarjaa. Tätä lähetystä tehdään Kuortaneen urheiluopistolla, jossa on ultrapäivät. Minulla on täällä seurana Ravi Logan, joka on Yhdysvalloista. Seuraava keskustelu käymme englannin kielellä. First of all, it is a great honor to meet you, Ravi. And I have to say that I was listening your lecture, and it was very brilliant and were very impressive topics. But can you little bit tell about yourself, who you are, and where you are coming from, and so on?
Well, I wear multiple hats. One of my main roles is as a meditation teacher. I'm ordained in the yogic tradition as in the role of acharya, and give advanced instruction in meditation. I've also founded, along with my wife, a spiritual community in the city in which I live called Dharmalaya. It is a well-known center that attracts much spiritual energy and gives focus to it in that town. I also am the executive director of an institute called the Prout Institute, P-R-O-U-T. Okay. It's an acronym for Progressive Utilization Theory. It is a new social vision, and that institute is trying to bring forward this new social vision. It is grounded in spiritual values, but it provides a deep alternative to what you might call neoliberalism, the dominant model of economic development on the planet, as well as a vision as to how to strongly unite humanity so that they work together in cooperative structures on the basis of honoring our diversity.
Today we are talking about neohumanism, which is your topic also here in Ultra Days. But before we enter into that, can you give a little short story about this, that how you became familiar with these spiritual issues? How this like awakening happening to the spiritual issues?
Yeah.
Short version, please.
Okay, it is a longer story, but I'll give you the short version. I was a child of the 1960s, and as you may know, there was you can say a wave of interest that affected many of my generation. Yeah. We saw deep problems in the world. We tried to face them politically, and we saw that alone was not adequate. That there needed to be some shift of consciousness. So I began, like many, taking interest in deep traditions of wisdom from other parts of the world, as well as within the Western world. Read many books from wisdom traditions. Was eventually attracted to, in the main, to the practice of yogic spirituality. But I've maintained interest in other forms as well.
Yes, and now this neohumanism, can you a little bit open it up? What is it, and how you have discovered it?
Yeah, as many of your viewers will likely know, during the European Renaissance, there came a wave of interest in a new form of culture and values that gave importance to the human being. The important thing was no longer so much the church or the afterlife, but the actual tangible life and expression of human beings. Their famous motto was that man is the measure of all things, means that we measure what is good, not in relation to the dogmas of the church or the obedience to the state or the needs of capital, but what is it that it provides for the welfare of actual human beings? Neohumanism takes that and expands it so that it takes into consideration all living beings, not just human beings, because we are not separate from the rest of life on the planet.
Yes, so this is a kind of oneness between everything, every living being here.
That is the underlying spirit of it. It is a sort of a spiritual outlook on life, this sense that there is a wholeness, a oneness, and going deeper, that there is some deep consciousness that unites us all.
And for this neo-humanism, this new way to see people is a bit different now than what we are used to. So can we go a little bit deeper to that?
All right, if you would like. It is a big shift in the way we look at people. It is not unique to something that has the name neo-humanism. You will find it expressed in different ways among many right now. More and more people are seeing that human beings have aspects to their being that is not just they are not just material consumers. We have a rich mental world. We have deep mental capacities, psychic capacities, and as well we have a spiritual nature. So it sees the human being in a holistic way, but not just as individuals, but also in the context of the society and the planetary life. And many are thinking along these lines. I'm sure you, with the programs that people who you've interviewed, you will recognize the similarities with many others.
Indeed.
Yeah, but neo-humanism is a particular expression of it that we found goes quite deep in its understanding.
Nowadays, if we are talking about the rest of humankind, they are more like identify themselves through this bag of bone, not as a spiritual person, like this new way of seeing it is. What do they say about it?
Yeah, that is true, but it is changing, and it is changing rapidly. People feel a hollowness, an emptiness, a lack of depth of meaning, just identifying themselves as consumers, as material beings. There are movements toward voluntary simplicity, toward reducing our consumer footprint on the planet. Many people are seeking meaning or a pattern of culture that goes beyond material consumption. And many of those are finding that one thing that their lives have lacked has been connectedness, deep connectedness with others, connectedness in love.
Yes. If we're thinking about this humanity, that people identify themselves as spiritual beings. So, so far we have seen that when people have a crisis, it's a good starting point for spiritual developing, because when people do have a crisis, they have to think about what is problem in their life, why they have those crises, and thinking bigger questions.
Yeah, as a meditation teacher, many who come to me come at a time of crisis, come at a time when they're feeling a particularly deep need to change and to find something deeper, something more substantive about themselves. They may not call it spirituality as such. They may not say, I want a spiritual life. But in different words, it is there. They want to expand their sense of who they are and how they find meaning in their life.
So people get know themselves much better and found more like a sleeping emotions from inside of them, and one of those might be intuition, which brings more information about themselves and about the world where they are living.
Yeah, that is correct. Oftentimes when, as you mentioned, people are in a state of crisis, that brings to the surface intuitional understandings about themselves. It is like they're searching inside, and then there is a deep wisdom or some deep well of consciousness that they connect with that brings forward deeper understandings, new ways of thinking about themselves and about life.
Yes. So when we are talking about this kind of higher consciousness, what is it meaning to you? How you define it? What is role for it?
Well, I'm very sure you're aware that that this higher consciousness is ultimately beyond clear definition, because it transcends the mind. The mind can only grasp what a certain arena, and that which lies beyond is this great mystery, this divinity, which is transcendent, which lies beyond the expressed universe. It is the source out of which the expressed universe comes. But in its nature, in its essence, I would say it is divine love.
Yes. Well, if we're talking about this divine love, it's like, Christians talking about Holy Spirit and Father and Son. When we are thinking about this Holy Spirit, is it like this kind of divine love? Because it's all about something holy, something spirit, something unseen things. How you define it?
Yeah.
How you see it?
I cannot speak for Christianity as a whole. There is a great diversity within it. But there certainly are those Christians who are deep mystics, who I believe experience the Holy Spirit in the way I would characterize divine love. People such as Saint Francis, perhaps, these great saints. That has been their profound experience of divinity.
Yeah. And when we're talking about consciousness, in a lecture you say that everything is consciousness. Everything has consciousness. And that means also little parts of a human body, those little cells and so on, but also larger things like planetary and consciousness and so on. Can you tell me more about this?
Yeah. Well, consciousness itself is just pure self-aware beingness. You know, the philosophies of the Far East, they talk about the ultimate reality as being the void. It is not such a good term. It suggests something negative. But I think what they're trying to get at is that there is not particular expression there. It is just beingness. And out of this fundamental beingness, which I've said is characterized by love, kind of a cosmic love, if you will. Out of that comes the expression of the manifest expression of the world. And then that consciousness, which underlies all of that creation, is there present in each and every aspect of it. It may be expressed more in beings such as ourselves that are highly sentient. But even some reflection of it is there in very underdeveloped life forms, such as single cellular organisms. And consciousness is expressing itself through life. It is trying to ascend back toward its original nature, if you will. So it takes different forms in different expressions of life, and even I believe there is a form it takes in planetary life, that the Earth as a whole is a kind of a living entity that has its own kind of consciousness.
So if we're thinking about this kind of planetary and consciousness, don't we all are part of it, or is it separately from us, ours?
Yeah, it is much like the cells of our body are all part of who we are, but they all have their individual existence too. You can extract a cell and put it in a petri dish and it will live, but it is fundamentally a part of the whole of who we are. And so we are much the same. We are all little living entities that together make up the greater whole of life of this planet. We are Gaia. We are not separate. We are the earth, the living sphere of the earth.
Indeed, we are the Gaia. Well, if we're thinking about this human consciousness, and we have our separated consciousness, which is connected to the larger collective consciousness, and from that to the planetarian consciousness.
Like
but if we're thinking about how this collective consciousness, which are part of our community, how does affect the people who are living in that community?
Yeah, my own understanding, it may not be correct, is that right now we have the culture of the West and the modern era has given so much importance to the individual that we are a bit at a time where this is a time where we are kind of sleeping in terms of our feeling of connectedness with the larger collective consciousness. It is there, it is having some effect on us. Many philosophers, some kinds of psychology, recognize, you may know Carl Jung, for example, has talked about a collective consciousness. He is not alone. There is a field of science now that was initiated by a scientist named Rupert Sheldrake that talks about morphogenetic fields that has begun to explore this. But for the most part, individuals go through their lives without very much awareness of their connectedness to a larger consciousness. Traditional peoples, it is my understanding, they lived in very tight tribal communities. They could not even think of themselves as separate from their community. And there was close intuitive connections between peoples in those cultures. Even the ancestor spirits, they felt a connectedness to that came from those cultures. Humanity is now turning back toward a new expression of collective consciousness, one that will not just be a collective consciousness of this tribe or that nation or this race, but will be a kind of a collective consciousness of the whole planet.
Yes, yes.
It will take a little while to evolve, but with the advent of the electronic media that is creating so much connectivity, that is furthering that process. People feel more and more themselves as part of the greater world.
Well, I have heard some of those examples when people has meditated about some certain subject and try to improve things. There has been some research that actually when people has prayed or meditated for some things, the good greater consciousness coming, it has affected to actually all society, that when they have done meditation for world peace, there might be that there hasn't been so much crimes at that time, but it does have effect.
Yeah, it does have an effect that, action starts first in the mind. We conceive action in the mind and then physically we manifest it. But even the conceiving of it at the mental level has an effect. For many whose minds are not very developed, who have not committed themselves to the cultivation of strength of mind, the force of that is not very great. But as you've mentioned an experiment in which people who have had experience practicing meditation have come together in communities and have tried to generate a strong field of peace. That has been shown to have some effect, as I understand. And if the minds are stronger, then the effect will be greater. And if the minds come together in collectivity, it will be greater. And if we can create centers, communities of aware people with stronger minds, whose minds are very pure in what they are conceiving. This desire for peace, as you talk about, for bringing humanity together. And these are in different places around the world, these centers of light at a psychic level. It may be that they link up and they begin to form a kind of a web of new consciousness around the planet that will have more and more effect of then in its practical expression assisting the rest of humanity to move toward a new kind of world.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about human relationship to nature. All Finns know that when you have bad mood and you go to the forest, your mood will change, your temper will raise down this level, and you will start to feel much better. So, but people in the cities usually are forgotten this, that how nature affects the people consciousness, and in that way also that their body decreasing those stress level and so on. What is your idea about this relationship between human and nature?
Yeah, I would say, from the little bit I understand, that the life in a forest, or the life in nature, you can say, exists in a kind of a balance, an ecological balance. There is a harmony of life there. And human beings living in this society, so often we are out of balance. We experience stress. Sometimes that stress manifests itself as these strong emotions, even sickness. So when we take ourselves and we go into a place where the life energies around us are in balance, are in harmony, it has a healing effect. It brings us into a kind of a harmony. I think that is very real, what you're talking about.
Do we have to do something, well, if we want to have reach the connection to the nature, do we have to do something else than just going into the forest? Is there something what we could do that this kind of connection between forest consciousness and own consciousness will find each other's?
It is a good question. Of course, just going will have some effect, but I think there can be more effect had if the person goes into the forest with a state of, how shall I say, a kind of an empty mind, a mind that is that is present in the here now, so that it can not be absorbed in its own thoughts and confusions and feelings, but can feel the energies more around it. And it may be that it is possible to go even deeper if one calls upon certain energies of the forest. There may be a receptivity of that life that could be tapped into. It is not my area of specialty, but I have heard that there may be beings in the forest, that some of these great trees have a kind of consciousness that can have an effect on human beings that you can develop some connection with.
Well, I have heard that the communication between humans or species, different species, is the key for that kind of changing energies. Like we all are having own energy, and we are all part of greater energy fields and planetary and so on. But this kind of communication that I see you, you see me, there is connection, and it starts that kind of interactive communication level in spiritual speaking as well. What do you think about it?
Yeah. One piece that I forgot to mention that perhaps you're very familiar with is that if a person develops their capacity for intuition, it is a kind of knowing that comes immediately. It is not kind of linear, rational thinking. And takes that mental capacity of intuition into their experience of the forest. I think that will increase their ability to receive understanding, receive the energies of the forest. And Yes, I think it is true that it can lead to, at an intuitional level, sort of an exchange of communication. There are those, you probably know, who are healers in traditional cultures who've gone into forest settings, and they have reported that some plant will speak to them, that they hear from that plant that it has a particular healing capacity that is needed to give some cure. There is a direct, a kind of a speaking, but at a deep intuitional level.
You just know what is going on. You feel and see things through that other.
Yeah, I think you become part of, you're not separate things from each other. You kind of become a part of each other's being, so that you understand it from the inside.
Your rhythm will be turning the same.
Yeah,
and you're
there's
the same
an
level.
adjustment, of the psychic waves somehow.
Yes. Well, this is very fascinating topics to talk. But would you like to tell us something what we haven't started to talk, but it's on your mind about this subject?
About the subject of neohumanism?
Yeah. But we haven't touched it yet, but it's still there waiting for coming.
Okay. Yeah. Well, like so many people of today, I grow more and more concerned about human beings' destruction of nature and human beings' separation from each other and antagonism toward each other. That there needs to be some deep way to cure that, some new outlook on life, a new outlook that brings new values. And the understanding of neohumanism is that there is this wholeness, this connectivity between all life, that there is a kind of planetary life, and that underlying that there is a divine consciousness. And out of that kind of understanding, there comes to be a respect that one has for all living beings, because one sees that life that is within me is within you. One may not respect the actions of another, but it respects their fundamental existence. And secondly, that because we're all together as a life together, we should have a spirit of working together in cooperation and collaboration to build the world that we want. We're not working as individuals in competition so much. Maybe sometimes some friendly competition is nice. It gives incentive, but the spirit, the deeper spirit is, let us work together to see that everybody gets their needs met, to see that everybody gets to develop their potentials holistically, physically, mentally, spiritually, and then be able to express those potentials. That will take us to our highest expression, our highest fulfillment. So that is the spirit of neohumanism.
What is stopping us?
What is stopping us? Yes.
Is it our bad associate, call it ego?
Yeah. Ego is, of course, at the core of it, but it is a kind of, even more problematic is a kind of collective expressions of ego. People identify, at a personal level, there is the egotism, but at a collective level, someone will identify, this is my group, I am a Muslim. Others, I am a Christian, And then they see there's difference between us.
Yeah.
And they see it in a way that leads them to, it may lead to exploitation, it may lead to oppression, it may lead to violence. Because there is my group and there is the other. There is not the sameness, the fundamental sameness. So if you see there is the other, then you can begin to, in your mind, create thoughts that justify violence against the other, exploitation, oppression, systems of dominance. And those are writ large on the planet now. And it is leading us toward dead endings, towards great catastrophe if they are not checked. So that's why I feel so passionately that there is need for this shift to understanding that We are not separate tribes. We are not separate races and religions. There is diversity. Of course there is diversity. It is the beauty of nature.
Yes.
But fundamentally, inside that diversity, it is a diversity of wholeness. With each part, adding color and beauty to the rest.
We all should realize that when we try to reach the top of mountains, there is also other paths than our path, but all paths lead to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
We sometimes forget that, and that's why those different religions will have a competition which way is the right way, but they forget that every path will lead to same goal.
Yes, that is true. So because we have a self-reflective consciousness. That is the nature of human being. We can examine what is in our own minds. Think about then who we are, where we came from, what is our destiny, what is our purpose. So those questions come up in human beings in different times, in different cultures, in different places. And people seek answers. And they turn their awareness, the great spiritual leaders have turned it inward to seek those understandings. So it is natural that they will come up with common understandings, though the language they use may differ, and the rituals that get built up around it may differ, and the institutions that get built up around it will differ. So all those things then get in the way of the deep essence that is there of all those paths toward the same goal, as you're saying.
Yes, very deep and important issues. In the end, could we have a little conversation about those basic instructions, how we could define ourselves, not just a bag of bone, but as a spiritual being who is part of fullness? What we should do?
All right. Well, the philosophy of neo-humanism identifies 5 practices that are helpful toward this end. One is to lead a moral life. If you do harm to others, it affects the clarity of your mind, of your consciousness. One needs to treat others as if they are expressions of spirit, as if they are expressions of God. That is fundamental to pure morality. So that is one thing, is how we treat others. Very important. Second is that we engage in practices that take our mind inward. Or you can say connect us deeply with consciousness, with soul, with God, however you may define it. There are many meditative traditions that do this. But there are some who do it through devotional music, through reading scripture. There are other ways as well. But some practice that gives us connection with the deeper reality. A third one is that we treat the world around us as if it is the expression of a, let us call it, unitary consciousness, a whole consciousness, so that we are aware of the wholeness of being, and therefore aware of the connectivity, that it is all a part of me, and therefore it becomes sacred. It becomes sacred. We have lost a sense of the sacredness of life. When there were great goddess traditions in the world, that was much more present. But under patriarchal religions and philosophies, so much that got lost. It is coming back now. A fourth practice is that we have the capacity for a kind of a discriminating understanding, that we not follow blindly our passions. These passions get used by those who would use fear and anger to separate humanity. In America, this is a huge problem now, you're probably aware. And other places in Europe, it is growing. So it takes clarity of mind to rein in these passions, these sentiments that get played upon by the demagogues. And the fifth thing is that we should make some effort in our life, as you are doing now, to raise consciousness, raise awareness, to educate people in positive ways, and also to use the force of love that we gain through our spiritual practice, our spiritual understanding, to have some impact on others. People, many are thirsting for love, they're thirsting for connectivity, they're thirsting for peace. And if we reflect that in our own being, it can have a strong effect on others. You see these great personalities like the Dalai Lama, just to use one example. There are many in different cultures and different religious traditions, but those who bring forward their love actively in the world have profound effect. So that is important as well. I hope that speaks to your question. There are many points I put forward.
I am sure that it will.
Okay.
Thank you, Ravi. That was my honor to meet you and have a short dialogue and interview here. Thank you.
You're very welcome, brother.